Now this is a basic 2-node installation, and I'm going to be installing this 2-node cluster on 2 Dell R620 servers. Each server includes the VergeOS 4.92 ISO on a USB to basically do the installation off of, 2 Intel Xeon processors, 128 gigabytes of memory, 2 10G base T ports, 2 1 gigabit ports, that'll be on our external network access for our UI, 1 2 terabyte PCI NVMe, that's for our vSAN metadata. The minimum requirement for that is actually 240 gigabytes. I just have these 2 that I'm going to use. And then 4 Samsung 850 1 terabyte Pro SSDs, and those will be for my vSAN Tier 3, which will be for VM workloads. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, as I jump into my first server, you can see both my servers are ready to go for the installation. I'll go to my first server here, and we'll click on the standard Verge 4.9.2 install. Now, when I click on that, it basically boots the OS up off the USB stick, and then it takes about 30 seconds to load into memory. And basically what we do is we load this into memory, and then we install everything out of memory off the ISO. Now here we go back to our first server. Here you can see I'm going to go ahead and set up my first controller. This is going to be a 2-node system, so I'll have 2 node controllers for high availability and redundancy. And we'll just go ahead and click OK. And is this a new install? Yes. I'm going to go down here to my US time zone. Typically it picks up everything automatically, either from your last installation, whatever you had running on here, or from your BIOS IPMI settings. I'll click Mountain since I'm in the Mountain time zone. Here you can see it's got my date, has my correct time, verifying that with my laptop time. Click OK. Now here's the name of the actual cluster. So when I log into my UI, this is the name I'll see in my, and we call this our cloud. So I'm going to call it my, let's call it my read cloud. Click OK. I'll use the default admin and the standard password that I use. We'll do it again. Here is my break glass email address. We'll use my work address. Now I have the option to, if I click on this, I can pick my all of my ports in my network, or I can pick just the ones that I'm going to use. I'm going to go ahead and click on there. Here you can see I have these different ports that I can use. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and click OK. My first port is going to be my 10 gigabit port. My 10 gigabit port will be my first core switch. So I'm going to click OK on that guy. My core switch basically supports my vSAN replication, all my data I/O, and my core services that are built into the cluster. I'll click enter on that or return. Come down here, you can see my default MTU is 9192. If I had this connected to a switch, I'd want my MTUs on my switch ports to be 9216 to be able to support my 9192 MTU for my core. It is my core network. I'm going to click yes on that. I'll just go over to finish with my left arrow and click finish. I'm going to use the default IP schema for my core network. I'll set up my second core switch, again using a 10 gigabit 10G base T port, and I can see that this is active because it has a little star next to it over here. So we'll go ahead and click OK. I'm going to edit that and call this my core 2 switch. I'll hit return. Here I'll leave everything as the default. It's still a core network, so I'll click yes, finish on that one. Click OK on my default. Now here I'm going to come down to my active port. I'm going to remove that port, and I'm going to click OK. And it'll configure the port with a little asterisk next to it, not the one that I put with my space bar, but right here. And this will edit this. We'll call this my external-UI switch. And I'll click that. And I'll come down here, and this time we're going to switch this to no. And click enter. And then also for my MTU, I'm just using unmanaged dumb switches for my 1 gig ports for my UI access. I could change this down to a lower MTU. I'm just going to leave it as is. It should pick up okay with that. And then I'll just go ahead here and click finish. And then we'll just click OK. And I'm just going to click finish on that guy. Nope. I'm going to go up. And we'll just click no on that. And we'll just call this extra. We're not actually going to use the extra switch. And then we'll go enter, come over here, finish. VLAN ID for your core switch. So we'll just take the blank here, or the default, because we don't have to put a VLAN ID, especially since it's cross-connected. Please enter the core network IP, so that'll be for the core. Same thing for the DMZ. We can take our defaults here. These will be applied. Please select the switch that will provide external network. That's my guy here. So I'm going to put a space bar, and I'll hit return. Which VLAN ID do you want to use for your external network? I don't have a VLAN ID on my external network. I don't want to use DHCP. I do have an IP address, so we'll do 192.168.2.44, and I'm on a /23 subnet, or CIDR, if you will. I'm going to click OK. And it picked up my gateway correctly based on my CIDR. I'll click OK. And then please enter your DNS servers. For my first DNS is an internal DNS. And then my second DNS, and you see it's space delimited, it's not a comma. I just go 8.8.8.8. That'll be good old Google. Click OK. Please select the switches that will provide the maintenance network. We don't have to do this today, so I'm just going to click OK on this. It's not a hard requirement to set up your cluster services. So do you want to make any changes to your IPMI settings? No, we're okay there. We'll pick that up automatically anyways. Click done. Please enter the username login for our update server. So this is typically applied during the licensing process. You'd be provided a user ID to log into our licensing servers. I don't have that right now, so I'm just going to click OK. It'll let me go through that. I can set this up later in my settings once I get into the UI. Now here's where I want to set up my vSAN partitions. This is based on my NVMe drive and my 4 SSDs. And it's asking me, do I want to apply the AES 256-bit encryption? Our encryption is software defined, so I don't require disks that support encrypted disk. I can do it with any disk in the environment, but I'm going to click no for now because I don't have a secure environment that I have a requirement for that. Now here you can see it picks up all my drives automatically. It has my cruiser drive that I'm installing my ISO from, or doing my installation off my ISO. I have my 4 Samsung SSDs, and then I have my 1 NVMe drive. And you can see the device on that actually says NVMe 0 and 1. So I'm going to do my space bar on my USB drive because I don't need to set up a vSAN tier for that, obviously. I'm booting off of that. I'll click OK. Now, would you like to manually set the tiers on any drives? Yes. And the reason we're going to do this is I'm going to set my NVMe to tier 0, so it's dedicated just to my metadata. And then I'm going to set and then I'll leave my my 4 Samsung SSDs to my tier 3. So I'm going to click on this guy, select return, and you can see here tier 0, just like I said, meta only. You want fast read, fast write, high endurance here. So I'm going to click OK on that, and now you can see it's changed it to tier 0. The rest of these I can leave as my default tier 3. I'll click done. Do I need to swap? Not when I'm running all flash and NVMe in my environment. I don't think that's ever going to be necessary. I'll go ahead and click OK. You may want to do it with hard drives. I don't even see the need for it anymore with hard drives, especially with the way that we write the I/O down to the disk very fast. You don't really need to swap, but we'll click OK. And here you can see as we're setting up the vSANs, very simple process. It goes in and it formats the first tier that we picked, which was tier 0. And then once tier 0 is done formatting, it'll go and pick tier 3, and then it'll format the 4 SSDs in tier 3. Now, if I wanted to use the NVMEs that I set up for tier 0 just specifically for my metadata, and I wanted to run VM workloads or services on those, I could have selected it as a tier 1 and still used it for NVMe data or metadata, but also at the same time I could have used it for my VM workloads. But when I put it in my tier 0, I'm basically taking that NVMe drive and I'm dedicating it just to my metadata so that it doesn't there's no I/O contention with VM workloads on the same drives, and also it's all dedicated to the metadata. Now here you can see we're going through the different SSD devices. It looks like this guy's almost done formatting. So I'm going to go ahead and reboot here. And while this is rebooting, I'll go ahead and go pull out my USB stick out of the server. Now with a little editing magic, you can see here, I am now at the boot up screen of my first node, and I have my VergeOS 4.9.2 ready to load. So I'm going to go ahead and click enter here. And it brings up all our services, and then there's a user interface. Now if I click on the user interface, go ahead and click return. It actually brings up an internal browser that we have, and you can see here I have my advanced screen on my internal browser. I click on that, I'll proceed to my UI, and now I can see my UI. Before we log in, I just wanted to confirm that my services were up and running. Now we'll go to my second console over here. Here you can see I've already booted my USB ISO up into memory, so now it's ready to do the second install for the second node. So I'm going to go ahead and click controller, primary redundant vSAN controller, just like we did on the first node. Click OK. Now this time, instead of clicking yes as a new install, I'm going to click no. And what this will do is it'll force it to join the first node controller in the node in the cluster. And you can see it's asking for my admin password to be able to join that node, and I'll go ahead and give it my admin login and password. Would you like to attempt to automatically detect the network configuration? Yes. This will attempt to configure the network, but it will not work if your core network resides on bonded NICs. So we're not on bonded NICs, so this shouldn't be an issue. Now here you can see it's detecting the NICs, and it's seeing a max MTU size of 9710, so there shouldn't be any issues there. It found my usable NIC, and that usable NIC is the first 10 gig port on my first node that I have installed, so I'll go ahead and click OK, and that shows that my cross connect's working correctly. Now this process here, this is where it restarts the fabric, and it also wants to synchronize with the NTP server on the first controller. And this time, this process can take a little time. Yes, we'll go ahead and my temporary, I'll just take DHCP. It'll grab an IP address off the core network that it already sees. There you can see it's establishing a link. It's got an IP address. We do a ping statistics. You can see 1 received, 0 packets lost. Okay, so now that we're back, we're done synchronizing with our NTP services. I'm going to go ahead and click I'm done. Now it asks us about our vSAN again, setting up our vSAN, because this is a new server, and it wants to be able to synchronize the disk on this new server with the current vSAN on the primary cluster or the first cluster. So would you like to encrypt vSAN? No. And then basically I have to set up my disk on the second server just like I set up the disk on the first server. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK on here. Let's see, it doesn't have my cruiser drive. And if I click OK, it should allow me to, would you like to manually set the tiers? Yes. And then this one, I'm going to set to 0 like I did last time, and then we'll click done. And here again, just like on the first node that we installed, you can see it's basically formatting the drives in the system. And this can take a minute or two to go through the format process, just like on the first drive or on the first server. So vSAN's done mounting. Now we're going to join the cloud with the node 1 in the cluster. And these are all the standard processes that it goes through as it's adding a new node into a cluster. So we'll go ahead and reboot it. And while that's rebooting, I'll go ahead and pull out my second USB. So here we are now, back at our boot. You can see here, instead of having the installer, it says VergeOS 4.9.2. I'm going to go ahead and if I let it, it would boot into that OS automatically that's installed on the NVMe drives in the vSAN. I'll just go ahead and click OK. Here you can see we've made all of our network connections. It's listening on all the correct subnets. The NTP is set. It's starting my vSAN. My vSAN is successfully mounted. After 1 minute, you can see all my services come up, and then I come into my user interface. This is on my node 2. You can see 2.32 here. My first node is 2.31. This is through my Dell iDRAC IPMI console. I'll go back to my 2.32. I'll select user interface, and this will then also bring up the browser. And we're done with our installation. Now, the second piece of the installation is I can go into my original IP address through my browser, and I'll go ahead and click. I already have the VergeIO in my home lab in my DNS. I call that HLab. I'm going to go ahead and click right there. Here you can see it logs right in. There's my read cloud. That was the original name that we gave it. I have my 2 nodes. These are the systems that we just installed. If I click on node 1, here you can see there's my 2 Xeon processors, my memory. You can see my drives. I have my NVMe drive, 1.9 terabytes available, and then I have all my Samsung SSD drives for that node. And then if I come into my read cloud again, and I look at my vSAN tiers, I have my tier 0 dedicated for my metadata, and then I have my tier 3 dedicated for my VM workloads. I can come in here, I can see my drives. If I go back into my read cloud, I can see my networks. I can click on all networks, my DMZ, my core network, and then I have my external network here, and that runs off my external UI switch. And then you can see my core and DMZ run on my core 1 and core 2 switch. Those are the switches that we set up. And then I have my extra switch, the one that we weren't using. And that's it. We've just installed a 2-node VergeIO cluster. Thanks for watching the video. Bye.